We'll go ahead and get started. I was expecting Nick. I didn't hear that he wouldn't make it. So we'll see if he gets here. In the meantime, I'll get started with Zoom instructions and roll call, if that's all right with everyone. Good evening. My name is Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager, and I'll work alongside Paul Hornbeck, our Transportation Planner, to facilitate tonight's meeting in the absence of Nick's presence. This meeting is being recorded and being posted on the City of YouTube channel within 48 to 72 hours after the meeting. We've invited people either in person for this hybrid meeting or to register on Zoom to participate this evening as part of our process. Mute yourself when you're not speaking, please. And the chat function for this public meeting is disabled, so all chats will go directly to us as the Zoom facilitators. The MPO reserves the right to mute or turn off audio or video to minimize distractions. Please remember to state your name clearly for the benefit of those participating remotely. Public comment will be collected as part of this meeting at the discretion of the chair or membership as we go through this process this evening to review the public comment we collected. Individuals providing comment should raise their hand function if they indicate they wish to speak, and if called upon, state your name before providing comments for 3 minutes. Okay. In lieu of the chair, Josh, do you recall from fresh off my memory, you were vice chair to facilitate?
Yeah.
Would you like to jump into that role this evening?
Yeah, I guess I'm just going to go from the little thing that I had from a reminder for roll call here. And I'll just go.
Josh, would you like me to?
Amy Miller?
Josh, since that includes the list of all the staff on the staff.
Yes, I guess I'll. Oh, okay, yeah.
I can call the roll because some of that list from the email is all of the staff advisors too, which will be an extremely large list. Okay, Althea?
Here.
Okay, Frankie Hayes let me know she was not going to be here tonight. Kevin Smith? I do not see him online. Nick Kuzmiak, also not online. Gregory Critchlow. Lance Fahey.
Here.
David Carter.
Here.
Josh Spence.
Is here.
Dot Neri.
Here.
All right. And Max Schreiber, not here. Okay. Thank you for that. This is our final meeting as we get into this. So I want you to call your attention to on the agenda, the minutes, notes from the previous meeting for your consideration, links to the recording for your record if you want to go back and watch that. So that's just for you to receive tonight. We have as item C on the agenda, based on the comment you provided us last time, before we released the plan for the 30-day public comment period, the final review of the public comment period received, the staff response, and if any action was taken in regards to changes of the plan, and a final draft of the plan, just for your final feedback this evening. So if you would, Paul, I'll have you share the feedback list. We can go through those. Did anybody see anything they'd like to talk about specifically on that list of the feedback we received and kind of our staff response to that? That's typical that this may be something new that you've seen. If you haven't participated in an MPO process, the MPO pretty consistently documents all of the public comment received from the 30-day public comment period and responds to it, whether that's just comment received or if there's a response, and then tells what action was taken in the draft in the plan text. And so those changes are then marked up in red so you can kind of call them out in the plan. So how does it feel to go? How do you want to go through these? Do you want to go through them each individually? Was there some that you wanted to call out and talk about? I'd welcome your comments about that process tonight.
Jessica, this is Dot Neri. I
Yes.
just wanted to point out on the second one, when it talks about shared paths being possibly problematic for pedestrians, the Sustainability Action Network just proposed that a center line be placed on shared paths to help people stay on their side. So just wanted to bring that up, that might be a solution if the city might consider it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we talk about that anywhere in the plan. It's something we could note as an option in terms of that text, in terms of some of the conflict of users where we talk about education. I'm not sure how effective that is. I know in many places where they have conflicting users from previous bike ped conferences we've attended, many of them mark them in places of high conflict. So they don't mark their entire system. They mark them at turning points or curves or places where there's high volumes. So if we were going to add a notation about that marking, we would want to make sure that the notation we added also reflected that it should be done based on best practices of assumption. But is that something the group would like to add at this last moment? I mean, that's something we could entertain based on best practices.
Does Joshua Spence, is there anyone that wants to entertain that, or or did everybody just want to move on to the next item?
I would move that it be at least mentioned as a possibility.
General consensus in that regard?
David Carter here. I'm going to confess at trying to multitask a little bit too much. And could you just rephrase what's on the table here? Apologize.
Absolutely. Dot was mentioning that in regards to conflicting users on shared use path, there's concern about pedestrians being the most vulnerable travel user and some of the conflict in those locations, and that there has been a proposal in the community as part of the CIP process to stripe some of the center lines of shared use paths. So that way it would have directional travel in places. I don't know what the proposal is. I haven't seen it specifically, but in best practices I have seen across the country, communities choose to stripe center line dashes or whatever on shared use path when they have high volume or high conflict in areas of bidirectional travel. So not just striping at large, but doing it very intentionally, kind of where it's most effective or where it's perceived to be high points of conflict. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, David Carter. I would second that. I think in high volume areas like the Burroughs Creek Trail, or areas where there's a lot of kind of congregation around Rock Chalk Park. I think those types of areas, it does make sense to at least mention.
We can add that. I feel like everybody nod general consensus. This is just feedback. I feel like we can add that. That's a fine thing. Okay.
Thanks.
Do we want to continue to scroll? Well, I get the light on, Josh. Do you want to take us to some of the next items?
Let me try to move your move you up out of the. Okay, there we go. So the next one that was on there is Lawrence will never be able to fulfill all the identified needs involved. The goal should be adopted to creating the best accommodation possible to avoid the. Okay, that's that's good there. Thank you. to avoid delayed sidewalks that may never happen, there are many streets where pedestrians walk in the streets. When rating street repairs, a pedestrians walk in the streets point should also be added to the rating for street repair. The pedestrians are sharing the use of the street with motorized vehicles and also need pothole repair and resurfacing.
Okay, so this is one in the plan where we did go and add the note that streets without sidewalks should be considered as part of asset management and some of that consideration. That's an evolving program that's going to have a lot of priorities, but that may be something that they should also consider. And so we added that notation in that long-term vision. Again, the needs for all of those things outweigh some of the funding resources. So that won't be an overnight fix, but we added that notation in the text. So
I think it should be added to added as a note into the plan. I think that's a good thing to bring into it.
yeah, and Paul, if you zoom out a little bit, I was going to show, so that's one of the items that if you look at, if Paul's going to zoom out, so you're not going to be able to read it when he does that. But on the far left side, you'll see that we did add our action based on this comment was to add that note in the plan. So
Actually, I can read with that. Okay, I can read, but not the best, but still. Okay, so.
And I don't know that we need to read all of them. Do you want to just talk about them as topics? Okay. So sidewalk hazards, we talked a little bit about here about how there's the sidewalk improvement program and then sidewalk replacement, which we talk about. It's kind of two separate things which are being addressed in terms of sidewalk mitigation. So that didn't address all of the users' comments, but we feel like that's it has a place, and we envision some of the reconstruction and issue with sloping driveways as part of the ADA transition plan.
Hey, Paul, could you go out to zoom it out to 190?
Okay. There's a couple comments in here about crossing, and we believe that the crossing standards and analysis work that the plan recommends we'll need to address some of that work for address locations and of course pedestrian crash history as part of that work, but that will have to be developed as part of that process. We had some feelings about this being a pie in the sky list, and we do, I think, admit in some ways this is visionary, and in other ways it's very practical in the sense that it offers a lot of project-specific recommendations that are prioritized for near-term implementation, and so it's kind of balancing both elements. We did revise one of the other modifications we did based on the revised vision. We added some context before the vision about the value and importance in the culture around sidewalks. So that's marked in red on the plan. There was some comments just about funding and concern about which money is eligible for which funds. That's really at that point really becomes, we think, a political decision that kind of has to get made on a year-to-year basis about which projects to match for grant funding versus what to implement. So we didn't make any changes to that. We forwarded, there's some other ADA comments, and we forwarded those to the ADA coordinator. Again, we got asked about brick sidewalk standards and feeling like the separate process in the brick committee wasn't specific enough and asked for additional detail, but there is no additional detail. That's a work in progress. So it is where it is in workflow. There's nothing else we could provide in regard to that for an update. We have we have a lot of things that, we've written in here, and you're right. I think they're right about its vision statement sounds lovely, and, we're going to have to do some work to get these implemented, and we don't disagree with that in terms of that. We modified the language in regards to the education and enforcement in terms of the statements about the effectiveness of staged and unstaged crossing. We tried to do that. They asked about effectiveness of some of the other decoys, although that information was not available based on the study. So we would have to do some probably additional understanding of that there if we're getting into implementing that. Those are just some scenarios that we proposed as alternatives. A few specific comments about specific locations that were either already prioritized as gap projects or on the non-motorized prioritization list. And then some comments in support and a comment about work in the right of way that we forwarded to municipal services. Also, we attached the letter of support for the plan from the Healthy Built Environment Work Group. And that's on, I think, the next page after some of this. Was there any of those specific comments anyone would like to talk about in greater detail or disagreed with our response?
What was, this is not Neri, what was the response to lowering the speed limit to 20? I think we just passed it.
Yep, I think the comment there was just comment received. I mean, that was a consideration. The reason why it was just comment received is, that 20 and 25 was both debated in that process. I don't know. I mean, there was a significant investment made to install all the signage for 25. It didn't seem necessarily politically feasible. I think at this point for us to engage in that process being so near to the term of just installing 25, there's still, I think, data to be seen around enforcement and how that's going to roll out in neighborhood traffic management. I wouldn't necessarily think, if in terms of staff recommendation, the staff kind of proposed both and politically 25 was chosen. I'm not sure no matter what we wrote in here, that there would be additional action kind of taken on that. So that's kind of how I feel.
That's good.
We just kind of left it at that. I didn't write that huge long response, but that would be kind of my rationale of why, if somebody asked in addition with that, but it could be a possibility for the future or in other areas. I think if there was additional need and it showed that the data, I'm not sure that there's been enough enforcement and or data collection of the enforcement to show how effective that has been without the enforcement. And I think, that data would really be needed to support an additional reduction.
Thank you.
I think if I remember right on the Josh Spence, I think if I remember right from the city commission meeting on that, they do adjust it down lower on a case by case basis, if I remember right.
Yes, and that's absolutely true. When they reduced to 25, the neighborhoods that were already at 20 stayed at 20. So there are streets still with 20 that can reduce even greater. There's that process already in place.
David Carter here. I have a kind of a procedural question. What happens to the comments that are received without action or no change? Are they just stay in this document, or do any of them go someplace where they can be evaluated by others?
Well, I think that's this process. So we will, as we get into the process of going through the review of this document, not only with this steering committee, but also with the technical advisory committee and the Multimodal Transportation Commission before we go to the MPO policy board and the city commission. This is a document that we present to all of those bodies for their consideration and feedback. And so they are aware that the draft we have presented, based on from what we've presented, here's what the comments we collected and the changes we made or didn't make. And it would be then at their discretion in that process to let us know that they thought our response was in conflict to the intent of what the body may want. And so that's kind of the process we're in this evening, to see if there was any red flags raised by any of you, to think that if you think that we should have taken additional action in regard to the comments that we collected. And if so, we need to negotiate what that may be before we continue to move in the process. But we can, once we get past this point, we would say to them, that the committee has, generally accepted and agreed with the response and the final draft before we forward it on to those bodies. And then they would also kind of have, especially like MMTC or TAC would have that same opportunity. Those will be hopefully in a May timeframe, that they would have that same opportunity to respond and call attention to anything that they felt should have received attention or been changed in the context of the plan.
Super. Thank you. Because there's the one that kind of sticks out for me is automated enforcement, which is well beyond the scope of this committee, but it's something that, for example, the city commission may seriously want to consider in terms of lobbying the state legislature. Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other comments in response to any of the feedback we received or the changes we did or did not make?
Oh, very thorough.
Josh, you may want to ask, I noticed we have a member of the public that joined, if they are interested in public comment.
If there's any public comment or a person that just joined in, would you like to make a public comment on anything that's on the scene limit or anything that's on the from the public comment period and MPO response?
Okay. The public has said no comment. I received a text message. No comment. Okay. So that's what we have to present to you tonight. Otherwise, the next steps for this process is taking this draft plan through that larger approval process to go to the Metropolitan Planning Organization Technical Advisory Committee, the Multimodal Transportation Commission for the City of Lawrence, to the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board, and also to the City Commission, which would be last in that process, seeking approvals and adoptions. After that, it really becomes rolled into our long-range transportation plan, which we're working on updating now, Transportation 2050. And I think it gives a plethora of work to do over the next 5 years until we consider updating this plan and process at that point. So if there's nothing else and any comments, I would take the opportunity to thank you for your participation and guidance to us in this process as we went through this. Thank you to those of you who took the opportunity to come out and table with us or speak to the public. We greatly appreciated your help in that process of soliciting the community about their values and input in regard to the pedestrian plan. So.
Well, and David Carter here, I just want to thank the staff for the extraordinary effort. It's really a great document, and it was a really inclusive process.
This is Dot Neri. I also want to thank, there was so much work involved in this, especially when you were down one staff person. So I'm glad to see Paul's on board, and I look forward to this, how this plan plays out in the coming years.
Is there any anything else in regards to the that was on the agenda? Any other comments or anything that was wanting to be discussed for the next step?
Nope, I think staff has presented everything that we had on planned for this evening.
Then I guess are you guys all okay with adjourning and saying that we approve that for this to be moved forward to the next level?
I don't know if that's two motions, but
Yeah, it is.
we haven't structured this as that formal of a meeting in terms of some of this process. So you're free to do that. Although generally, I think the feedback of this is that there's consensus around support for the plan from this committee. And that's how I would convey the work that we did here to get to this point from this process. Okay.
Do you need a motion to adjourn?
Nope. I think if we finish the business of the agenda, we may adjourn once that's done. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.